Good afternoon. There are things that never change, even after COVID. Students always want to be at the back. Even if it means they leave empty chairs and all that, that's just fine. Automatically, when they get into a place, they are going to be at the back. Now, I had hoped that because they say COVID changed the world, things like those ones would have changed. It's obviously they don't change. So now I'm going to beg us colleagues to come closer. All of you, just make sure that we come closer. And let me ask the UKZN delegation to move into this front row. There are reasons why they are here, very, very important reasons. Deputy of the College of University of the Humanities and principal of this college, Professor Nhlanhla Mkhize, our guest lecturer and speaker, Professor Colon Emerick, the representatives of the cluster, the leadership of the cluster, starting with Father Joe Phiri, our chairperson, and members of the executive, including Dr. Rowan Murray from St. Mukiti Methodist Seminary, and I am not sure, I can't see him here, but I hope he'll be joining us, Reverend Carl Brooks, who is the head and principal of ESA, the Evangelical Theological Seminary, the representatives of the United Congregational Church, who are here today in their numbers. Very, very important delegation, because the gentleman we are celebrating here, Professor Steve de Gruchy, was a congregational. And over and above being a congregational, he actually brought congregationalism to dominate the School of Religion, Philosophy, and Classics. His legacy lives on. And so when one sees sorts of good things that he did, and so to see the leadership here, Reverend Schwartz, who is the secretary of the South African Synod of the UKZN, and Dr. Mpofu, who is a member of staff, and Dr. Mpofu, who is a member of staff, seconded to us, to the university, specific KwaZulu-Natal, members of the cluster, colleagues. I also seen of the KwaZulu-Natal Christian Council, members of staff. I've seen the chaplain of St. Mukiti Methodist Seminary. I have seen many.
Good evening, everyone. I want to greet you first before I pray. I was looking for internet. I wanted to do some emails. So I went to a shop, and while there, I saw internet provided here. And I just went to the shopkeeper there, and I said, where is the internet here? And so she said, how are you? And then said, yeah, I'm all right. How I said, we greet before we do business. So it's good to see everyone here, and I greet you as Professor Mangaso said in the name of our Lord Jesus.
We're not only a people and where they come from with knowledge, the knowledge that was there during the pre-colonial era, because the assumption in this institution, and there's a place for the School of Religion, Philosophy, and Classics in particular. And so it is an honor indeed to have a man of
the Dean of Studies in Theology. And I want to make a special mention of Professor Steve de Gruchy. I want to address him directly because I do believe that he is present here with us. We honor him and we honor his spirit. And we also extend that to the Gruchy family as well, who are here with us today. And we thank them for bestowing upon us one of the most illustrious sons of the soil. I'm also extending our sincerest greetings to all our international partners. They have been singled out by Professor Kumalo, as well as all our local partners in the vicinity of the university as well as regionally. And then to you all, members of the various congregations, and members of the academic community, as well as members of the student community, as well as our community at large. We welcome you to this very auspicious event this afternoon. On behalf of the Vice Chancellor, Professor Nanapoku, and the entire executive of the university, we are very proud to be hosting this lecture today. And I do want to mention that I spent a lot of time working with Professor de Gruchy. I served with him at Senate. I also served with him in the College Management Committee during the time that he was head of the department, and at the time that I was head of the Department of Psychology. And to me, he has never really left us, and his memory is as bright and clear as if I saw him yesterday. So we are very pleased that today we will be having a lecture in honor of him, and that the lecture is being extended beyond the school to the larger community of South Africa and globally. So with those words, ladies and gentlemen, it is my singular honor and Wesleyan and Latin American experiences. His teaching experience covers a broad range of theological areas, including systematics, Wesleyan theology, ecumenism, and Latin American theology. His research brings theologians like Thomas Aquinas and Hans S. von Balthasar into conversation with voices from the theological periphery, like Bartolome de la Casa and St. Oscar Romero, guided by the conviction that Christian theology sounds best when symphonic, or being comprised of many voices. Born and raised in Puerto Rico, Colon Emerick was the first Latino to be ordained as an elder in the North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church, and was founding pastor of Cristo Vive UMC in Durham, North Carolina. He became founding director of the Hispanic House of Studies at Duke Divinity School in 2007, and joined the Divinity School faculty in 2008. From 2010 to 2021, he served as the director of the Central American Methodist Course of Study, which trains Methodist pastors who have not earned a formal Master of Divinity degree in such places as El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Panama. He is also director of the Duke Perry Theological Initiative, a partnership between the Methodist Church of Peru and Duke University Divinity School. He became director of the Center for Reconciliation in 2016. Under his leadership, this center has expanded its capacities and programs, including the launch of the Initiative of the Americas for Transformation and Reconciliation that brings together scholars and ministry practitioners from across the Americas to support reconciliation work. In 2020, he was appointed Associate Dean for Academic Formation. Colon Emerick serves on the United Methodist Committee on Faith and Order and on both national and international Methodist Catholic dialogues. In October 2022, he met with Pope Francis for the second time as part of a delegation from the Methodist Catholic Dialogue and presented Pope Francis with a report of the 11th round of dialogue, God in Christ Reconciling, on the way to full communion in faith, sacraments, and mission. Colon Emerick is the author of several books, amongst which is The People Called Methodista, Renewing Doctrine, Worship and Mission from the Margins, which was published in 2022, and several other books which you see listed in this illustrious biography of his. Ladies and gentlemen, indeed, we have a scholar of great international stature in our midst, and now it is my pleasure to call upon Professor Colon Emerick to deliver this special lecture today. Thank you.
Paz y bien, pax et bonum, peace and well-being be with all of you. It is for me a indescribable honor to be with you. I am a theologian, and it has been said that the theologian's first commandment is to honor your mother and father, because we don't work alone. And today, I feel that we are gathered here to honor someone who has been a father, a brother in theology for many. And for that, I can only say thank you. John de Gruchy's son, Steve de Gruchy, was a passionate ecumenist. And writing on the work of Joseph Wing, who was also known as Mr. Unity, he spoke in terms that may well be applied to himself, to Steve de Gruchy. He wrote, "It is because the church finds its meaning in God's mission that he understood denominational division to be a scandal, and the ecumenical movement and the non-racial nature of the church to be absolutely crucial for the witness of the gospel in the world. For him, ecumenical unity was not a goal in itself, but a means to the only real goal that Christians could have, namely, to proclaim and live in obedience to the Lordship of Christ in the midst of the social, political, and economic struggles of the time." Now, I believe that Steve de Gruchy's assessment of the motivations impelling ecumenism are fundamentally right. Ecumenism exists for the sake of mission. and missional credibility depends on ecumenism. The Gruchy's ecumenical passion was all the more exemplary given when we consider that most of his active career was spent in what some consider to be the twilight days of ecumenism. The days of ecumenism's heyday are seen in the past, and we are now in a period where not as much is happening. Indeed, as early as 1989, Robert Runcie, Archbishop of Canterbury, spoke of the winter of ecumenism. When the General Secretary of the World Council of Churches met with Pope Benedict in 2010, he gifted the pontiff with a thick pair of woolen mittens. The language of ecumenical winter is by now ubiquitous. But of course, you know very well that winter in the northern hemisphere is a different season in the southern hemisphere. And that I suggest that ecumenism needs to go south if it is to be renewed in the way that Steve de Gruchy worked for during his rich, albeit too brief, a life. And so in this lecture, I want to consider the renewal of ecumenism and some lessons and dreams from the majority world, from the global south, by first introducing you to an unlikely ecumenist from that region, Oscar Romero. Oscar Romero and his witness to the preferential option for the poor can inspire the renewal of ecumenism by offering lessons and inspiring dreams. And this renewal is pressing. It is pressing because there are obstacles on the way of ecumenism. Steve de Gruchy himself was familiar with barriers to ecumenism in South Africa. He saw his attempts at guiding diverse churches to organic union frustrated by what he refers to as the desire to root church unity upon a cultural and political foundation rather than a theological confession. He endeavored to correct those who regarded church unity as a thing in itself rather than as being rooted in the wider missio Dei, in the mission of God. He argued that the unity of the church is for the sake of the witness of the church to justice, peace, and social inclusion. Barriers to ecumenism are not only to be found in South Africa. I have had the privilege of studying, teaching, and serving at the Divinity School of Duke University, a school that was founded as a Methodist school, but intended to be a place where Christians from all denominations would feel welcome. Currently, in my school, there are 33 denominations represented. And that is not only in the student body, the staff. It's a diverse community, an ecumenical community that has formed me into an ecumenist. And since 2008, I've had the humbling privilege of representing Methodists in bilateral dialogues with Roman Catholics at the national and international level. And over these years, I have been blessed by the exchange of gifts that comes from walking toward Christian unity. There is something truly remarkable about traveling, reading, discussing, eating, and praying together with fellow Christians with whom one has substantive differences and yet with whom we are committed to be at table. There are two things that I have learned in these dialogues. First, and perhaps paradoxically, I have found that participating in ecumenical dialogues has helped me become more, not less, Methodist. And second, and certainly unsurprisingly, I ran into barriers on the ecumenical journey. And I want to just share a few of these with you. First, there is, in an ecumenical journey, often a lack of a common goal. Jesus prayed that his disciples may be one as he and the Father are one. And this unity certainly does not mean uniformity. There is legitimate diversity within Christian life. Nevertheless, beyond this broad level of agreement, differences emerge because Jesus never offered a clear blueprint or model for unity. Prior to the Second Vatican Council, the Roman Catholic model for unity was simple. Return to Rome. The earliest Protestant expressions of ecumenical movement had a different model. Organic union, the merger of diverse churches under one common structural agreement. Methodists in the international dialogue speak of moving towards full communion of faith, mission, and sacramental life. The World Council of Churches speaks of reconciled diversity. For some, the goal is visible unity. For others, spiritual unity. For still others, interdenominational collaboration. Multiple models, multiple goals, much confusion. Second, ecumenical skepticism. In Latin America, my region of the world where I'm most familiar with, many Protestant churches have deep doubts about the work for Christian unity. Interdenominational cooperation is one thing, but a movement that embraces Roman Catholics as sisters and brothers is something else for many. The language itself is telling. In Latin American communities, to this day, it is common to hear people speak of Christians and Catholics as if there were two different groups. The word ecumenism in Latin America bears the misfortune of sounding sort of like the word communism and evokes a suspicion of encroaching hegemonic forces. After all, Latin America and Latin American history bears the marks of centuries of Roman Catholic ecclesial monopoly, which has only been broken up in recent decades. And so the idea of sitting down with a Roman Catholic for fraternal dialogue strikes some, perhaps even many Protestants, as a betrayal of the gospel and of the witness of hard-fought battles for social recognition. Third, nostalgia for a golden age. It is common to hear that our best days lie behind us. The early decades of the 20th century witnessed stellar signs of hope for Christian unity. The formation of the World Council of Churches, the invitation of Protestant observers to attend the Second Vatican Council, the publication of the Joint Declaration on the Doctrine of Justification, and many, many, many more. The abundance of signs of movement towards unity inspired John Paul II to look to the 21st century as a millennium of renewed Christian communion. So far, those hopes have been disappointed. Ecumenists have often pointed to the problem of reception, that the agreements achieved through official dialogues have a hard time changing the situation on the ground. It's one thing to publish a document on the doctrine of justification by faith, and it's another thing for the churches to cross the bridges that others have built. Fourth, and I'm going to stop after this one, I don't want to depress you and just present obstacles. Fourth, apathy. Apathy about division. Simply put, we do not miss each other enough. In the International Methodist Catholic Dialogue, of which I spoke, we read together the parable of the prodigal son and reflected on how that parable was something of a mirror for our communities. Not in the sense that the Methodists were the younger brother who left the house and that needed to come back. No, no. Both of us abandoned the Father's house. Both of us lost our way in licentious living in a far country. Both of us lost our way while still remaining at home and working. Both of us were the younger son. Both of us were the older son. Both of us longing to return to the Father's house. And both of us still waiting for resolution to our divisions. In the parable in the Gospel of Luke, the older son refuses to celebrate with the father. And as we reflected together, one detail leapt out at us. And it was this: that in his journey to and from the far country, and in the brothers' relationship, they never expressed missing each other. The younger son wanted to come back to see his father. He never mentioned his brother. The elder brother said, "What is it? Why are you welcoming this son of yours?" Refusing to recognize the kinship they had with each other. The older son only bears contempt for the younger son, and the younger son spares no thought for his older brother. Neither refers to each other in that way, neither longs for each other. It's hard to come together when we don't miss each other. We need a renewed ecumenism that overcomes these and the many obstacles that there are on the way towards communion. And the challenges could be multiplied. As I said, the movement has hit many impasses. And I propose that if it is to advance the credibility of the church's witness, the ecumenical movement needs to look south. There are theologians whose pastoral vision has been forged in the crucible of announcing God's justice in an unjust world. And I want to introduce you to one of these global ecumenists, Oscar Romero, prophet of a new ecumenism. Oscar Romero was Archbishop of San Salvador. This is a country small country in Central America. Very small indeed. It's known as the thumb of Central America, which gives you an idea of what it looks like. And it was a time of tremendous turbulence in this Central American republic when there were vast income inequalities dominating the landscape, failed attempts at land reform, rumors of a Cuban-style revolution. In this conflicted climate, some wanted the church to serve as a bastion of national stability. Others dreamed of a Christian guerrilla movement. The election of Romero as Archbishop of the country's premier church post was seen by most as the safe choice. He would not rock the boat. Some were relieved at his election. Some were dismayed at his election. Both reactions misread the man and the moment. Because just days after his installation as Archbishop, on March 12, 1977, Romero's dear friend, Father Rutilio Grande, along with two of Father Grande's parishioners, were killed by a death squad on their road to their congregation, their church in El Paisnal. Romero heard the news, and he understood that now that he was the pastor of a persecuted church, and that his mission as bishop was going to be defending his flock with every preached word, every side prayer, every written statement, every pastoral visit. In brief, he sided with the poor and he met the fate of the poor in his country, which was an early violent death. On March 24th, 1980, Romero was murdered at the altar of his church while preaching from John 12:24. Unless a grain of wheat dies and falls to the ground, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Romero fell. He bore much fruit. And one of these is a new ecumenical praxis, the preferential option for the poor. In 1979, the Catholic bishops of Latin America met for their third official conference in Puebla, Mexico. On the eve of this trip, during a Sunday homily, within the week of Prayer for Christian Unity, January 18 to the 25th, Romero preached, "With the help of our Protestant sisters and brothers, we will continue striving for a gospel that truly serves our sorely afflicted people." Romero returned from Puebla, Mexico, with fresh language with which to express this ecumenical and liberating gospel, the language of the preferential option for the poor. What does this mean? The Peruvian theologian Gustavo Gutierrez expresses it this way: the preferential option for the poor is a theocentric, a God-centered, and prophetic option that sinks its roots in the gratuity of God's love. This option is good news. It is motivated by grace, not by works. God does not opt for the poor on account of their moral and spiritual disposition, but on account of their human fragility and the disdain which they experience. The preferential option is a way, indeed the only way, of being authentically Christian in societies propped up by systems of structural economic inequality. As Gutierrez explains, following Christ in these settings entails profound, permanent solidarity and daily insertion into the world of the poor. In other words, the preferential option for the poor is not optional. It is not even optional for the poor. They too are called to make an option for the poor. Indeed, when the poor opt for God's love in the midst of contexts of persistent violence that refute the mere possibility of love, they become the best witnesses of God's love revealed in Christ. How is it that this preferential option becomes an ecumenical praxis? Well, for Romero, as for many Latin American theologians, the reality of things is understood better from below and the periphery than from above and the center. The epistemic privilege, ecumenical voice was, in Romero's words, a source of great encouragement. Mutual learning and effective witness come from ecumenical collaboration on common challenges and concerns. This is why Romero calls on Protestants to join Catholics in the work for human dignity, the promotion of peace with justice, the application of the social teaching of the gospel. Romero's Christ-centered sentir, thinking, feeling, sensing, integrates the preferential option for the poor and the ecumenical imperative. The cry from the peripheries sets the agenda for the call to unity. The way in which Romero embodied the preferential option for the poor earned the admiration of Salvadoran Protestants like Lutheran Bishop Medardo Gomez, who long before Romero was beatified and canonized, referred to his Catholic brother as Saint Romero of our America. During Romero's time as Archbishop in some, the preferential option for the poor became an olive branch for Protestants and a lifeline for the Archdiocese. Indeed, for Romero, the preferential option for the poor became the compass which helped guide the people of God, Catholic and Protestant, to stay true to Christ in, for, and from the margins. Now, from the life and lessons of Oscar Romero, an ecumenical praxis emerges that I believe can remove obstacles to unity and renew ecumenism by celebrating the gifts of unity, by visiting the wounds of division from the periphery. New possibilities for social transformation can be imagined and implemented. However, an ecumenical praxis alone will not suffice. It needs support of a new sensen, a new sentir, a new thinking, a new sense of being we. In one of his homilies on the Transfiguration, which was incidentally a very important theme in Romero's theology, Romero tells a story from the life of Father Damien among the lepers in the island of Molokai. And on how on one occasion, Father Damien's desire to remain with his community was so strong that he prayed for the grace of leprosy. And one day, as he raised the Eucharistic host during the Mass, he noticed on his hand the first signs of leprosy. And from that day on, he always spoke to and of his community as we lepers. The first person plural pronoun is not the royal we. It is a new we. It is a Christological we. It is a new sentir con la iglesia, a new sense of solidarity. It is being one with the church by being one with its wounds. At the Center for Reconciliation at Duke Divinity School, which you have heard I direct, we have begun a new project called the Americas Initiative for Transformation and Reconciliation. The Americas Initiative, because by the way, those of us who are in Latin America never called the United States America. That's something only people in the United States do. We speak of the Americas because we're in that same place. That's for another lecture, though. I digress. I return. One of the things we have learned in this work is that there is a restlessness for a new sense of we, and also a resistance to a new sense of we. Rolando Perez, one of our friends in the center and a sociologist at the Pontifical University in Lima, Peru, says it well. In Latin America, we are still a society that strongly resists looking at those whom we consider to be the other. We are profoundly disconnected from our memory, and it is impossible to talk about reconciliation without being connected to our collective memory. He's right. A new we is not possible without reckoning with the histories of exclusion and violence in which the American Global South was conceived. The groans for a new we clamor for remembering suppressed memories and dreaming ecumenical dreams. In the early church, difficult experience with the edicts or dogmas of Caesar and the universal pretensions of Rome led our mothers and fathers to distinguish the oikumene of the empire from the oikumene of the church. The word oikumene simply meant the inhabited world, but it had more of a sense than that. It had the sense of civilization, and it had the smell of empire. And so the early Christians knew that the oikumene of the empire of Rome was not the oikumene of the church, and even less what the letter of Hebrews calls the coming oikumene, the oikumene of the kingdom of God. These distinctions are just as important today. The coming oikumene will come from a new sense of we that is very different from the menu of options commonly available to us. It is not a neo-colonial we. It is not a neo-capitalist we. It is not a neo-nationalist we. It is a new creation we. And the hope of this coming oikumene empowers the praxis of the preferential option for the poor and inspires dreams of Christian unity. And I would like to share a few of those dreams with you, if it's all right. I dream dreams of an ecumenical movement that goes out to the world. Ecumenism and mission cannot be separated. The call to unity came from the mission field, where the denominational differences among Christians were a scandal for the Christian witness. Christian unity matters, but it does not exist for its own sake. Unity is the goal of the ecumenical movement, but it is not the goal of the church. The church seeks unity for the sake of the credibility of its mission in the world. And in a world of structural suffering, the ecumenical journey cannot be limited to flying from Rome to Geneva and then with a stop in Canterbury and then maybe New York or DC. The journey must go by the road from Jerusalem to Jericho, the road of mercy. To cite Steve de Gruchy, to share the love of Jesus Christ with a world in need means always to bring a loving presence to those who live on the margins of society. I dream dreams of an ecumenical movement that goes down to the margins. The church needs to remember and to attend to what is happening in the majority world, sometimes referred to as the two-thirds world or the global south. You can choose your terminology. As the church has changed, so too must the movement toward Christian unity. The ecumenical questions emerging from the global south are not the same as those emerging from the global north. Doctrine matters, but the pressures on the churches are not simply those coming from the secular age. They're also the pressures and the wounded legacies that come from the colonial age. With masterful understatement, de Gruchy observes that the European cultural captivity of the gospel is unhelpful for everyone. And he's right. Moving to the margins with the written word. Despite how dry and arid the Bolivian highlands may feel or look, nourishment and life always spring next to Christians of different traditions. God's promised future is ecumenical, and a school that forms people for strictly denominational or even non-post-denominational leadership is out of step with God's future and out of tune with Christ's prayer. In ecumenical settings, like my own, I have learned that the old saying is true. In essentials, unity. In non-essentials, liberty. In all things, charity. And yet, it is from the perspective of the poor, Romero would say, that essentials become clearer, and that the teachings and practices fall into the right categories, and that the shape of charity and its clarity becomes evident. Finally, I dream dreams of an ecumenical movement that walk with our fathers and mothers throughout history and our sisters and brothers around the world. In 2025, we will be marking the 1700th anniversary of the first ecumenical council, the Council of Nicaea. That council yielded a creed known commonly as the Nicene Creed, a creed that arose through a complex interaction of scriptural reflection, liturgical practices, cross-cultural encounters, ecclesial aspirations, and imperial anxieties. The first version of this creed included statements of condemnation, anathemas. The final version omitted these for an expanded confession of faith in the Holy Spirit. The liturgical version of the Nicene Creed switched the "we believe" for an "I believe." And the Western version of the Nicene Creed added what is called a filioque clause that reduces ecumenical appeal. I don't have time to explain all those things, just to tell you that it's a complicated history. And that I would like us to see the commemoration of this history, to walk the path that the World Council of Churches has outlined for the pilgrimage of justice and peace. Namely, that path that celebrates the gifts that come from this creed, that visits the wounds of its composition and transforms the injustices of its transmission. We need more affirmations and fewer anathemas. We need more "we" and less "I", a renewed "we" that includes the 318 Greek-speaking council fathers and also a great multitude that no one could count of synodal mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, in some more Holy Spirit, more Pentecost. This past January, I traveled with fellow staff of the Divinity School to the U.S.-Mexico border. We spent several days at La Casa del Migrante, a shelter run by a Catholic religious order. And there, we met with asylum seekers from Latin America and the Caribbean. We shared lunch with a couple from Venezuela, traumatized by their traverse of the notorious Darien Gap in Panama, where they had literally seen some of their fellow migrants being eaten by crocodiles. We washed dishes next to would-be refugees from Haiti, eagerly awaiting an interview to make their case before immigration officials, a case that they were almost guaranteed to lose. The director of the Casa del Migrante, this migrant shelter, took us to visit other shelters, food pantries, soup kitchens. Two things struck me. First, how ecumenical these ministries were. And second, they were led by lay people. On Sunday, we visited Friendship Park. It is a space set up by the United States and Mexican government for people from both nations to be able to meet each other. However, nowadays, Friendship Park is cut in half by an 18-foot high wall that extends 200 feet into the Pacific Ocean. It is not a solid wall, but a fine mesh steel fence pocked by holes big enough that you can touch someone on the other side of the border if you just put your little finger, your pinky finger against the fence. The fence is being threatened by human and non-human actors. On the Mexico side, people have turned the fence into an expansive mural with colorful messages of love and strong denunciations and calls for justice. On the US side, the salt air, well, on both sides really, the salt air and seawater is corroding the wall. It will not stand for long. But not to worry, the US government has promised to tear down that fence and build a new one twice as high. Every Sunday at that fence, a small group of pastors, activists, friends, and bystanders gather for worship. When the U.S. Border Patrol allow, they gather on both sides of the fence. Songs are sung, scriptures are read, the word is proclaimed in English and in Spanish. The pinky peace is passed. The Lord's Supper is celebrated. All this happened on that Sunday in the presence of a small band of around 7 persons who had somehow gotten around the fence and were waiting to be picked up by Border Patrol so they could petition for asylum. It was a bitter, blustery afternoon, and the agents who saw the would-be refugees were in no hurry to pick them up and process them. Better let them wait, sitting on the cold ground, exposed to the ocean wind. As we worshiped, I was overwhelmed by the fact that we were worshiping during the week of prayer for Christian unity. That was when we were gathered at this wall. This is the time when Christians give God thanks for what unites us and lament and repent of the dividing walls of hostility that we have built to keep others out. The theme for this year's celebration of prayer came from Isaiah 1:17. Do good, seek justice. It was a theme chosen by the Minnesota Council of Churches in 2020, right before the murder of George Floyd in Minnesota. Praying at the wall, I thought again of the remarkable fact that this annual celebration of the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity is in close proximity to the annual celebration of the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr. You see, the search for social justice and the search for Christian unity share a common path and destination and a common traveling companion. And the name of this companion is mercy. This is the testimony of biblical and ecumenical prophets. Mercy runs shelters, heals wounds, and humanizes outcasts and extras. As Steve Gruchy says, to share the love of Jesus Christ with a world in need means always to bring a loving presence to those who live on the margins of society. This is the preferential option for the poor as a renewed ecumenical praxis. Thank you very much.
Brothers and sisters, I have the honor to facilitate the debate after this amazing presentation, so inspiring. I cannot resist saying a few words to thank you. I've been thinking, we have here somebody from the US talking to us South Africans and other parts of Africa about San Salvador, Oscar Romero, Gutierrez. That in itself makes the world smaller. Then we have a Methodist celebrating Steve de Gruchy, a colleague and friend from the Congregational Church, and talking so much about Catholics. That also in itself is a sign of something. And I cannot not mention that this gathering is organized by the Peter Milesberg Cluster of Theological Institutions. And I don't know if you know, the roots of that go to the apartheid period, more than 30 years ago. And I want to celebrate a few names of those who dreamed about the cluster in the 80s. It was Professor Gunther Wittenberg, a Lutheran. Joe Wing, his name was mentioned. So important, a congregational. Archbishop Hurley, I don't know if you heard of him. Major ecumenical figures. So we are here as part of a long tradition of ecumenical movement, of journey, I would say. And you said, let's not speak about the winter of ecumenism, and you're right. I mean, the fact that we are so many, so doesn't look like a winter. So, but I would like to thank you particularly because South Africa, because of apartheid and because of many things, has a tendency to be isolated and sometimes self-centered. We think that we are the only one to suffer from load shedding, for example. That's not true. Other countries, including in Europe, if you don't believe me, go there, also have load shedding. But you help us to be more global. You help us to understand that you took us to the wall between Mexico and the US. I wish we could follow you there and pray with you. So I just wanted to say, this is very welcome. It will certainly help us to think broader. And your main message, I think, is what you said at the end, is that the search for church unity and the search for social... What sound is that? I don't know. And the search for social justice is the same thing. About the preferential option for the poor, which is not optional, as you say. And I think we are in South Africa at a difficult time of our history. We have actually huge challenges. We only start to look at them. And we the need for a new Kairos. And I think your speech hopefully will inspire us to continue somehow in the same direction. I'm sorry, I was not meant to talk, but I could not resist. But it's also good to have a bit of a word of thanks. Now, my job officially is to facilitate a discussion. Let's see if somebody wants to make a question or a comment. Please, before talking, I ask you two things. One, you say who you are. I am so-and-so, whatever church, SMMS, UKZN, St. Joseph, whatever. And secondly, you short. One or two sentences maximum in your questions or comment. Who would like to say something, contribute? Don't be shy, don't be overwhelmed.
Thank you so much. My name is Feruzi Ngwamba. I'm the coordinator of Access and Extended Curriculum Program of the College of Humanities, a program that caters for students from disadvantaged background. Your presentation really speaks about what is currently happening within our own societies and perhaps within the global south. And if we look at the current changes within the global order, and I'm trying to think about what is happening in Ukraine and some of the new concepts that emerged around the issues of refugees, where we had good Christians from Europe received in harmony in Europe and being considered best refugees. And another group of, perhaps I could call them black Christians, crossing the seas, arriving in Europe, and not considered the same way the other ones were considered, which means the we that you are talking about. Can you make any comment around ecumenism during this time, taking into consideration what is happening in Ukraine? Thanks.
It's a very important question. When I was visiting the US-Mexico border earlier, so last year, received many refugees from Ukraine, which was new to them. They were used to receiving refugees from Latin America, sometimes Africa, but not Ukraine. And it seemed that those refugees received a preferential treatment, as it were. Facilities, government-supported facilities for them to be sheltered and to be processed in ways that were not happening with the refugees from Haiti, from Brazil, from Venezuela. And so this question is one, it's a very important one. And I think where the ecumenical comes in is that ecumenism, we need to open it up and to recognize that our we should not have any borders to it, and our sense of we, of who we are. And so we should be opening doors, not closing them. Those who are working at the border, of course, the shelters, they were helping everyone who comes in through the door, because they saw in them first a human being and not a nationality. But it is a challenge that that we face in the refugee crisis, and that different refugees are treated differently for various geopolitical reasons. And so this is, again, which ecumenism are we following? Are we subscribing to the ecumenism, a certain kind of geopolitical ecumenism? Is it the neo-colonial one? Is it the neo-capitalist one? Is it the First World one? Or is it the church ecumenism that has a very different vision for whom do we prioritize? And we prioritize the neediest one.
Praxis. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. And I agree very much. And this is what I was talking about, the cry of the poor and the cry of the earth and the cry of Christ. And the Mesoamerican Christ song, I wish I could play it for you, is very beautiful and powerful in how it makes these connections and the woundedness that is being experienced by the land and the water as also vulnerable and wounded.
Good evening. I'm Clifford Madondo. Dr. Madondo at St. Joseph Theological Institute, and also here at UKZN. I'm part of the Theology and Development Program. I'm proud to say that I'm one of the last students of Professor de Gruchy. And I've got close, really, sentiments and memories of him. One of the things that you mentioned in your lecture is mercy. And what I remember as well with Prof. de Gruchy was the quote from Micah 6, 7 and 8. Mercy, just, and walk humbly with your Lord. And from